Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. So, and thanks for the introduction. That saves me having to go through the details. So, certainly, we are both representing Independent Neighbour University. I'm formerly the Mixed Reality Lab at the University of Nottingham. And please bear with us because this is a bit of a tale that goes over time. So, what this was, and this will need a bit of background, it's a bit of work that's been going on for a while. Started out as a PhD in 2013. And since then, I think we can all agree the world has changed quite a bit. And Warhammer itself has changed. When we started this work, Warhammer was in its sixth edition, heading on to seventh, the tail end of well, a big change there. And the industry itself has also changed. Wargaming has changed. GW has grown massively, much more popular, household name, and the way they do things. Back then, they didn't talk so much. And the miniatures have gone through primarification. That's all changed. No, we never thought Space Marines would change at the time. Nor did we think the canon or the lore would progress to where it has either. And it's fair to say that there's more people playing Warhammer than ever before, which does have a bit of an impact on this work. So as we go through the things we're talking about, please bear that in mind because especially if we are playing Warhammer at the time, I think you'll see some of the changes, a bit of nostalgia here. So what was this all about? It started off with a PhD project which asked a seemingly simple but hopefully deep enough question at the time, which was framed a little bit by the Internet of Things, which was very fashionable at the time. And this is just like with potential supervisors, you might be asking, what does computer science have to do with a hobby of tabletop wargaming? Well, hopefully we'll make that clear. So the question was, if we could capture and record, right, everything about an object, what it does, how it's being used, so the table I'm sitting at, right, all the meetings I've had, all the discussions I've had, if I could just go and browse them effectively, find out everything about an object, this coffee mug, how many cups of coffee have I drunk at whatever temperature, if I could access that data and track it, like automatically, would it change my relationship with that object? Would it change how I felt about it? Would I collect it? Would I value it differently? Stuff like that. So a bit of a hypothetical speculative design question there. And it's effectively about the digital footprints that objects leave behind and that we can then reconstruct their lives with, which might sound a little bit out there, but the Internet of Things was kind of pushing that. And if you think about it, it's not so much out of the realm of possibility when we do it ourselves through social media. We are putting so much data out there, not just through social media, the way we interact with online services. We're creating these digital footprints of data as humans that somebody could easily reconstruct. I'm not going down the AI route today when this was being thought of. We didn't worry about that too much, but it was all heading that way. So other than potentially a recipe for turning people into hoarders, because the idea was if you try to throw something away, is it going to jump up and say, no, don't. Do you remember all the fun times we had together? What was this really heading towards? So we were trying to find out. Let's see if my slides will actually change. There we go. So to investigate this, the first step was a bit finding an exemplar thing, right, in the Heideggerian sense, that would be a good exemplar object to study. Because it was tricky. Everything we looked at was kind of treated a bit differently. We needed something that had a perceived value. People valued it. People would go and collect it. Some stuff is just beneath our notice. It doesn't come to our notice, so we don't particularly go out and seek it. It has to be something people collect, people are interested in. But then it has to also be something that has an interesting life. Folks might, again, classic example was the mug. They might collect mugs. They might get a mug as a gift. So it might be a significant object, a gift or something, or a memento. It might be a memory of something, but after that, doesn't have a particularly interesting life. So we looked at a lot of things, and asterisk on the musical instruments, we'll come back to that. Cars were mentioned for a while as a potential thing we could do, but it was the idea of every scratch tells a story in an object, how they get pattern of use, what can we do? So it didn't take that long, actually, before somebody asked the question of, hey, what about these Warhammer miniatures? So let's have a quick little look at that, and I'll try and speed up also a little bit. So as physical artifacts, material things, they are born of craft, right? I think we can all agree we pour in a lot of money, time, effort into assembling, painting, and in some cases converting them, making them expressions of our creativity. In most cases, quite unique. I mean, you might follow the assembly guide and build something straight out of the instructions, But the moment you put, well, I mean, even that will have some variation. But the moment you put brush to it, it's yours. It's your unique creation, especially if converted. And this applies not just to single miniatures, but also to entire armies. You might convert an army in a particular way. So tick that box. Then, as game pieces, things get quite interesting because I think we've all seen how the gameplay can really drive the hobby, right? People buy stuff and assemble stuff in order for a gameplay purpose to make an army list or something. And it gives the miniatures a very practical purpose, right? They are game pieces. You need them for the game. They do stuff. And the rule sets are also providing a common framework and language between players. We all know what a Space Marine is and kind of should do, depending on the rule set we're using. We all know what a Land Raider does to a certain extent. And the rules give the models a certain agency. They can do stuff within those rules, but they might also fail to do stuff when we combine this with dice, which means, well, we'll see what that means. And the third thing where it gets quite interesting is that the miniatures are not just generic objects in most cases. They can represent characters and identities from established and non-established lore and canon. So this is where the beauty of the Black Library and the way Games Workshop has very intentionally over the years kept a very flexible narrative, right? Which leaves enough space for everybody. So you can have a miniature or a series of miniatures that represent a known character who have left their own footprint through the story. So Catus Sicarius has had, well, two, now three, apparently, official models. He's got artwork that depicts him. He's got stories that depict him. And there are fan creations of him. And you can do this, of course, with characters and armies that you have created, right? Make your own Space Marine chapter. That is encouraged, and there is room in the world building to do that. So with all that in mind, it does look like miniatures might be the ideal object. They are born of craft, right? Creative expression. They represent something bigger than the mere material object, whether it's in terms of rule sets or whether it's in terms of intangible character identity or a collective identity. And they have a very active and lively existence on the tabletop. Okay, they might sit on the shelf for a bit if the rules are bad, but eventually they might make it to the table and they'll do stuff, they will act, and sometimes that's out of our control, which means we get emergent narratives. It's the yes, you can write some fiction about a miniature or character you're making, but you can also write about what they actually did, sort of out of your control. There is always the dice in there. So we thought we'd found our perfect thing to study, and it just so happened we were based in Nottingham, so that had a bit of an impact as well. GW was aware of this work. So we thought, all right, we've got it. Let's dive in head first. Couldn't be easier, right? In fact, what really clinched it is that there is an existing practice. I'm using the term practitioners of the hobby here because if I say hobbyists, that's one portion. If I say players, I'm excluding hobbyists. So practitioners was the holistic term for people who collect, build, paint, and play, and read the library books and all the rest of it. So battle reports are already a practice. People are writing down what the miniatures are doing and forming them into sometimes very, very good narratives, depending on the style. So surely we could just bring in our tech and support this practice. Stick an RFID chip like on this fella over here, if the blur allows it, and we'll use that to sort of link them to a digital record like the Totem Project and so on and so forth. Thankfully, we don't do things that rashly. We did fly a little bit of rigor here. So thought, okay, first step, let's find out what actually happens. Which commenced the first stage, which was a longitudinal ethnography of the wargaming community. It's a tough life sometimes in academia. You've got to do things, a bit the hard way. So Warhammer World was literally down the road, right? In fact, local pub, you might say. And off we went. Now, a quick note here, in terms of research, it is a bit of a problem because some of you may have visited Warhammer World, having the gravitational pull of that facility there means it eclipses other things and not a lot of friendly local gaming stores. Everybody just goes there. And you may be aware that Nottingham is called the Rust Belt, the Lead Belt, for good reason. If you throw a stone, you're probably going to hit a war games company. Mantic Games are there. Warlord Games are just on the other side of the road. Spectre Miniatures. It's a lot of them are staffed by XGW employees. And it's quite a focal point. So we did look at other potential things other than Warhammer and worked with some, but don't have a lot of time to go into it, but there was a very interesting discussion that to be had about historical versus fictional settings. And if you'd like to discuss that, very much would love to. And also, we've got some publications about that. So, with that in mind, off we went. What did we find out? Found out something relatively straightforward, that augmentation was very welcome. After all, the community are quite techy, especially at the time. But you do not want to mess with the core practice. We want to roll dice, we want to roll physical dice, just because it'll be more convenient to track what a miniature has done if we're doing it digitally with a dice roller app, doesn't mean we want to do that. Some games did try to do this. Golem Arcane, I think, off the top of my head, wasn't very successful. And also, the tech has to be invisible. You're already spending a lot of time during a game of Warhammer tracking what everything is doing. Difficult. Remember, we're talking about 6th and 7th edition here. Asterisk on what comes later. So, the practicality is also a little bit tricky. Yes, there might be the will. People do want to know what all the miniatures are doing, but once you have a Horde army or Imperial Guard army or something like that, it gets a little bit tricky. There's just not enough time to do it. Other things, the hypothesis was saying, miniatures do get up to a lot on the table. They will move, they will shoot, they will charge, they will fight. Depending on your rule set, they will challenge. That's back now in the Horus Heresy, thankfully. And they might take actions if you're playing 9th edition, which wasn't a thing when we were doing this. But they might also fail to do so. And it was very interesting to see how the miniatures got the blame, some not as often as the dice, and not really the player. It was Sergeant Bob who failed to do something or succeeded, who had his heroic last stand or whatever. So we have a lot of stories about that. Now, it was also interesting that miniatures would be developing these sorts of relationships between themselves, not just within the army, but outside the army. Like if a character killed off another character from a friend's army that you played often, they were interesting stories there to tell. And it was also interesting that the miniatures were considered pretty much always as part, well, always is a strong word, but as part of something bigger, as part of a force, as part of an army, as part of a collective identity. More on that in a second. So the key takeaways, and this is where things started going down the philosophy and more design route, is that the presumption that singular material objects were the focal point here. I'm holding a miniature here, but blur doesn't really want to work with me. Was not really the key point. It was more often they were considered as part of a group collective identity, right? The army they were in, the squad they were in, and the rule set sort of encouraged this. In 40k, at least, when you were doing something, depending if they were an independent character or a squad or something, again, we have to think of the context here, it was the squad doing something collectively. So also the actions, even if they were like more unique troopers in there, like a special weapon or something, still attributed to the group. So it was a challenge, though. How do you attribute things? Quite interesting was the fact that miniatures would adopt and shed these identities quite often. You could have a mini that was used for very different things. Some games it was, or when you made your army list, again, where does it happen? Sometimes they were a sergeant, sometimes they were a captain if they looked the part, if that's all you had. Sometimes they were just a marine with a bolter, a nameless marine. The big one, though, was that we found hobbyists thought more in terms of intangible identities. So it was cases of, oh, it's my warlord, it's my character XYZ that I've made, but it wasn't always the same miniature. So this is the inverse of what we're just talking about now. It wasn't always the same miniature that was representing them on the table. So the identity was always there, but it wasn't always the same physical manifestation. So very much a Ship of Theseus situation. Is it still the same person if the physical thing has changed? So I thought, okay, where do we go from here? We've got some interesting things to work with. And the IoT angle took a little bit of backseat because the rest was a little bit too exciting. So I better check how we're doing on time here. Please let me know. So we have 3 vignettes here that were characteristic of this thing, and I'll go through them quickly because it gets a little bit much. I should mention there was a paper from this earlier work from 2015 if you'd like to go read out some of the findings. So vignette number 1, I'll like to introduce you to Inquisitor Terry. He was the case of the ideal case, the hypothesis where there is a singular identity, Inquisitor Terry. We know who he is. He does a bunch of things. He is a member of the Inquisition, a known collective identity that does a bunch of things, and they each have the record of what they do. And in this ideal case, there is a particular singular distinctive miniature that's unique that has been made to represent Terry and will always represent him. And that miniature has its own record as well. And they are a 1-to-1 match. If we look at this over time, another perspective, you can see here we have the collective, hopefully my mouse is visible, the collective identity of the Inquisition. Let's see, that is always going over time, and that has its own record, things the Inquisition has done. Terry, member of the Inquisition. And then you have a miniature that has been made for Terry and is going in lockstep. They'll always be progressing the same. What the miniature does, Terry will do, and the Inquisition will be informed, as they usually do. That was a very rare case, to be honest. What normally happens is you have an identity. So I'm going to test your Badabor knowledge here. Laius Isidon of the Raptors chapter was our example. No reason. And who always existed. He was pretty much always the warlord of the army, and he was always there in the games as well. But there wasn't a specific miniature to represent him. Sometimes it was this model. Sometimes it was this model. It changed. I never actually got around to getting in for them. Sometimes it was an Alpha Legion model for reasons that will hopefully be obvious. So in this case, you have a singular identity that goes over time, and here it is in timeline form, that is part of the Raptors' collective identity, and those always go over into time. And then there are events in the timeline, games in this case, over here, which during these games, stuff happens and then are logged to the record of that identity, but it's different models doing the acting. So the physical manifestation did not matter. Another vignette is Sergeant Bob, who was a case of a generic object, in this case just a Bolter Marine, who did whatever was needed at the time. Sometimes it was a sergeant, sometimes it was a Bolter Marine, and depending on who he did, so this is more focused around the object itself as the focal entity, and depending on the job, he would contribute to different records. Sometimes as Sergeant Bob, sometimes as just nameless Marine producing data for the Raptors' collective identity. This was a very common case, and the case where you probably would not bother to collect data about that specific miniature, but more like what did they do for the whole collectively. Hopefully I still have you and I haven't lost you. So this all came together into the identity framework that was the main deliverable of thesis. Really don't have enough time to go into the details of it, but please do feel free to read if you like or ask any questions. And how this applies to miniatures, hopefully might make it a bit clearer. The key building blocks are those identities, which come in two flavors, at least at the time. Singular identities, specific characters. Collective identities, which would be units, armies, entire factions, and they can be granular and like nested. And these would be at times manifested by certain material objects. Sometimes a singular, unique object, one that would always, like a Primarch model. If you have a singular identity of Corax, he'll always be represented by the miniature of Corax that you have or may not have. Then you have generic objects like Sergeant Bob. These are interchangeable. They are physically generic enough that they can do multiple jobs. Might just be a Marine with a bolter, Marine with a bolter and a sword. They can do many things. And they can represent various identities at the same time. And a third interesting one, especially in the IT perspective, was proxy objects. These are objects that don't have the physical characteristics that would turn them into game pieces, but they can still represent that identity. For example, if you're playing Necromunda, you have a card that is basically your fighter card, has all the stats on. Think of this as your D&D character sheet. It's not a miniature of your character, but it does represent everything about your character. It can be the physical manifestation of them in some cases, the only one you'll have. So that's where that went, and it got put all together in a bit of a practical thing, which was an augmented reality exhibit, which had an exemplar case of a little vignette of it was Deathwatch versus Tau, yeah. And this was a case where the story was fully formed. Every miniature, it's the story of its physical craft, how it was built and painted, was recorded and told. What they had done in games was recorded and told. And there was a engaging augmented reality experience where basically a tablet you could look over every miniature and tell you what it done to sort of share this narrative. And the question was, now that you know everything about these miniatures that you didn't know anything about before, how do you feel about them? And it turned out to be quite effective. This was combined with a lot of 3D scanning where we invited, because this was running in the public for about a month, invited the public to come and 3D scan meaningful objects for themselves, most often miniatures. You can read all about that at the mixedrealitystorytelling.net website, should still be up. So this was generalized. Sorry, and I'll speed up because I'm not sure of the time. Please let me know if I'm over time. Uh, which was, I think I mentioned we'd talk about musical instruments. That was another exemplar case where we said, okay, now let's make an object that is spines like from cradle to grave. Everything it does is tracked, kind of like Inquisitor in this case. So we made a guitar in the lab, filled it with tech to track what it did, and also covered it with art codes, which are machine readable codes, very similar to QR code, but they look a lot prettier. And you can read all about its life and also the paper. So from miniatures over to other things as potential design products and whatnot. So to summarize, and probably what quite a few are thinking, how does this all fit in with what's going on today? Our timing could have been better. The Viva for this PhD was in 2017. It just so happened in the same year, Games Workshop released Shadow War Armageddon, which was basically Necromunda, but in a 40K setting, 40K models, old school Necromunda. And basically, skirmish games were back in. So games where it mattered a lot more on a small scale, individually in miniatures, tracking experience growth, and all the rest. And Kill Team came out, and several versions since then. Not to mention Necromunda itself, right? Blurring the line between wargame and PhD. Arguably, these would have been fantastic examples to have to hand at the time, because, well, Necromunda was mentioned at the time. It was not really an active product. And even mainline 40K itself, where we were really squaring the circle a little bit to cover what was, a mass combat game compared to a skirmish game. Warhammer itself now has Crusade, where tracking what your miniatures do, collect how many experience points, how many kills, all that stuff is now encouraged in the mainline game. It would have been wonderful to have this. I'm not saying that there is a correlation between when the work was happening, which had GW's blessing, and when they started doing all these things, but it'd be nice if it was. So, where are we going with this? So, it's a bit of a nostalgia trip, diving back into this and doing a little bit of a retrospective. I really wish this conference had been around back then, because it would have made a lot of conversations, both with supervisors and with funders, a lot easier, not having to explain the concept every time. And Warhammer is a lot bigger now. There's a lot more people playing, a lot more people interested, coming in with different and new and fresh perspectives. So this is something it'd be wonderful to revisit. And with the Horus Heresy series actually being over, which wasn't something that was thought might happen, maybe also my excuse of procrastination have also gone away. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully I haven't been over time. It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour and covering a lot of ground really quickly, but hopefully you found it interesting.